السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I greet you with the universal greeting of peace on this day of Yawm al-Jumu'ah. Okay, so firstly I'd like to thank the Mosque Committee for having invited me to give this talk. Like Sheikh said, I was supposed to give it 3 months ago, but that was the day that our beloved Sheikh Fuad passed away. The reason I was asked to give the talk around that time was the mosque was busy with the drive to get people to donate to the bone marrow registry. This was going to be part of that, and also cancer awareness. So firstly, I should say I'm a kidney specialist, so I look after patients who've had a kidney transplant. I'm not really directly involved with finding the donors directly, especially what we call deceased donors, but I'll come back to that. Obviously, I'm not an Islamic scholar, so this is my reading of the topic, and it is quite a controversial topic, but we'll go through some of those points. So let's start with, unlike bone marrow and blood donation that we were talking about last year, organ donation is a little bit more emotional and an emotive topic. I mean, if you give blood or bone marrow, those things, your body makes more of them. If you give a kidney, or if in case of a deceased patient, kidney you can give if you're alive because you've got 2 kidneys, you can give one. Obviously, other organs like heart and liver and lungs, you can't donate those, and those come from what we call deceased donors. So because of that aspect, that it's a little bit different to giving blood or bone marrow. So we'll talk a little bit about deceased donation. So most organs that are transplanted come from deceased donors for that very reason, that you need to have died because you don't need those organs. The situation is quite different when we come to Muslim countries and also Muslims in non-Muslim countries. There's very little deceased donation. They're happy to give like a kidney when they're alive, but once the person has died, the family is not that happy to give the organs. Most times this arises where somebody has died from like a severe brain injury. Normally it's a car accident or a gunshot or something, and the patient is declared brain dead. So this is an important concept now. What is brain dead? Brain dead is when there's such a severe injury that the patient is only kept alive on a ventilator. So it's quite a new concept. It only came up about 50 years ago. And the reason it arose is because that was around the time when the ventilator was invented. So I'm sure you guys have all seen when, even on TV, or we might have seen patients in hospital where there's a tube going into their lungs and the machine is breathing for them. So that's when they're either too ill or too weak, or their breathing center isn't working. Okay, a little bit closer. So when somebody is brain dead, the only reason that their heart is still beating is because this machine is now oxygenating their lungs and the blood, and the heart can continue to start beating. If you switched off the machine, the heart would stop beating within a few minutes. And the only reason that became necessary is because this machine was invented. So without the machine there, the heart would stop beating anyway, because there'd be no drive to keep breathing. And the part of the brain that is damaged when somebody's brain dead is what we call the brain stem, which is the back part of the brain, which controls things like breathing. So it's important that when somebody is declared brain dead and the testing is done, there's no chance that they can regain life, because nobody has actually regained life. Actually, if they did a special scan, or they did what we call a arteriogram, there's no blood going to the brain in that situation. So the brain actually is literally dying, and if you waited like a couple of days and kept them on the machine, the brain would actually what we call liquefy it. It would, because there's no oxygen and blood going to the brain. Okay, so it's actually also interesting from an Islamic perspective. So brain death is obviously a new concept. It's not discussed in any of the Islamic text. I did, though, recently come across an interesting verse in the Quran, which is actually from chapter Az-Zumar, which is chapter 39, verse 42, and also a similar verse in chapter Al-An'am, which is chapter 6, verse 60. And I'm not going to quote directly from them, but they both speak about the concept. I'm sure most people have heard about this concept, is that our souls are withdrawn from our body when we sleep and return to us when we waken. And if it's not returned to us, then we would die in our sleep. That's quite I think quite a well-known concept. In fact, in the Cape, sometimes they're called sleep declain duet, or the small death, because of that idea which Allah has mentioned in the Quran. So it's also interesting to note that the part of the brain which allows us to awaken from sleep is actually also found in the brainstem where that breathing center is. So in a way, if that brainstem is permanently damaged, like I said, in brain death, the small death becomes the big death. But it's a very indirect reference. So also important to mention that organs can also be donated after the heart has stopped beating. That's the normal way that the traditional way we define death. But because the heart's not beating and the organs are not getting blood, you've only got a few minutes to remove those organs before they become unusable and deteriorate. Because of that very narrow time window, it's actually more difficult to do donation from those patients, because you need to have procedures ready, you need to have a theater ready, you need to have a surgeon ready to remove those organs within a few minutes of the heart stopping beating. And because of that, it's done not that commonly. In fact, in South Africa, there's only one hospital that does it, which is Grooteskies Hospital, which is where I work. So, theoretically, if people had a problem with the concept of brain death, you could switch off the machine and the heart could stop beating and you could still use those organs. Especially the kidneys is what we're using at the moment. So that brings us to the question, is donation of organs from a deceased patient allowed in Islam? And that's the controversial topic. And there's 2 points of view, okay? The majority view actually is yes, you can do that. There are some scholars that obviously find arguments to reject this concept. So like I said, transplantation is not specifically mentioned in the main sources of Quranic law, which is obviously the Quran and Hadith. But most Muslim countries do allow organ donation, and I'll give you the reasons. But these include countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Malaysia, Iran, and most Muslim councils or Islamic councils in non-Muslim countries like the UK and the USA. In fact, as far back as 1995, so what is that, 24 years ago already, the UK-based Islamic Sharia Council declared, so 1, the medical profession is the proper authority to define the signs of death. 2, current medical knowledge considers brain death to be a proper definition of death. 3, the council accepts brainstem death as constituting the end of life for the purposes of organ transplantation. 4, the Council supports organ transplantation as a means of alleviating pain or saving life on the basis of the rules of Sharia. 5, Muslims may carry donor cards. 6, the next of kin of a dead person, in the absence of the donor card or an expressed wish from that person when they were alive to donate their organs, may give permission to obtain organs from the body to save other people's lives. So we often have this problem that the family says, well, we never spoke about it and we don't know what the dead person would have wanted. But the family can take up that responsibility on themselves if they think that is a good thing to do anyway. And then lastly, they mention organ donation must be given freely without reward because trading in organs is prohibited. So, that position is still the current position, and it was actually, as I said, taken 24 years ago. They already took on that decision. So, what are the Islamic arguments to say that it is allowed? I'm not going to go into the ones that say it's not allowed because, I don't agree with those, but I'm going to focus on the ones that say they are. So the main points are, 1, that deeds are judged by their goals and purpose. Okay, so obviously the purpose of organ donation is to help somebody that has organ failure. It's not in any way there to harm the person that's died. The person that's died, you're not trying to do any further harm to them. So that's the first thing. It's the goal is a good deed. So organ transplantation, the second point is it preserves human life. So, I mean, Allah promises this much quoted verse from chapter 5, which is Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 32. So it's a long verse, but the second half says, if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved the life of the whole of humanity. So, and I'll mention later on, you can save many lives by agreeing for a deceased person's organs to be used. Okay, the third point is organ transplantation is an ease made available to mankind to overcome hardship faced by patients with end-stage organ failure. I don't know if anybody here has seen somebody with severe heart or liver or kidney failure. They have a very poor quality of life. Okay, so, and there's a verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, which is obviously chapter 2, verse 185. Allah intends every ease for you. He does not want to put you through hardship. Okay, the fourth point is, so charity is a central pillar in Islam. And, I mean, donating an organ without wanting to be paid back, I mean, can actually be considered the ultimate charitable act. I mean, it's easy to give money in a way, but to give like a part of your body when you're alive, or to say that when you die that you agree for your organs to be donated, that would, I mean, what could be a bigger charitable act than that? The fifth point is there's a concept in Islam of necessity making even something that would be normally prohibited lawful. And when the only option is to save a life of a patient with end-stage organ failure is organ transplantation, then in a particular, like I said, with patients with liver, heart, lung failure, then even if you somehow considered it unlawful, it would become acceptable by that principle. And the verse there is, which I'll quote to support that, is from Surah Al-Baqarah, again, chapter verse 2, verse 173. But if one is forced by necessity, without willful disobedience, nor transgressing due limits, then he is guiltless. For Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. And then a final point, which I recently came across, is that, in fact, permissibility, allowing things to be done, is actually the default state in Islamic law. So, by that I mean, unless there's a verse or another principle which contradicts what you're intending to do, then it should be permitted if it's not directly discussed. And one verse which illustrates this is from Surah Luqman, which is chapter 31, verse 20. Are you not aware that Allah has made subservient to you all that is in the heavens and all that is in the earth, and lavished you with his blessings, both outward and inward? So, yeah, that fairly sort of explains that. So that brings us now to why do so few Muslims in South Africa actually agree to organ donation when it seems that it's actually acceptable, Islamically and in most Muslim countries? And how few that is can be demonstrated by the fact that, just looking at kidney transplants now, about 10% of people waiting for a kidney transplant in the Western Cape are Muslim. I did a quick review of that recently, and I just went on Muslim first names. So, I mean, people are not required to declare their religion, but about 10% of the people waiting for a kidney, and there's like about 400 patients are Muslim by first name. Yet, only 3 patients in the last 25 years that were deceased donors were Muslim, which is way less than 1%. Okay, so in effect, in the Western Cape, and I'm sure that it's even probably worse, or at least the same in the rest of South Africa, Muslims are prepared to receive organs when they need them, but we as a community don't donate. Okay? So, to me, that seems like a very un-Islamic and a selfish way to be doing things. But that's what happens. So why are people doing this? So the most commonly when I'm not involved, like I said, in that process. It's the transplant coordinators. They approach families when somebody is brain dead on a ventilator, or potentially is the heart's gonna stop beating, and they ask why are you saying no to donation? They'll say it's not allowed in Islam, which, like I've just told you, is not correct. And then when they say, who told you that, out of interest? Then they say, well, everybody knows that. So it's a problem with disinformation in a way, or maybe misunderstanding of what the Islamic position is. And although the MJC, in fact, a few years ago passed a fatwa saying that organ donation is allowed, families say they're not aware of this. And the MJC had some issues with brain stem death, that concept, but most families don't even, that's not an issue for them. They just say organ donation is not allowed. So, I mean, what is the problem? Is it a lack of education and awareness? In reality, families need to discuss this issue before that situation arises when somebody has died. You need to discuss it with your children in your homes. We need to discuss it like we are now from the member. The imams need to all discuss it, but it needs better education. And I don't know if any of you know any patients with severe organ failure, like I've mentioned before, but it actually is, especially kidney failure, very common. And the problem in South Africa is that in the state sector, there's very limited capacity to dialyze patients. So they only dialyze somebody if they are well enough to get a kidney transplant. So if you're not transplanting patients, you can't put patients on dialysis. And many patients die because they can't get dialysis. And even if they are healthy enough to get dialysis, to have a transplant, there's no space to get them onto dialysis so that they can wait and get that transplant. Some other concerns people have raised, according to our coordinators, is that there's this concept that you're going to harm the body or disfigure the body, and there might be delays in burying because of doing the procedure. In reality, most patients actually need an autopsy anyway, so they're going to have surgery on the body after they've died. And the autopsies can be done and very quickly. And the actual procedure takes like an hour or two. It's very quick, the organ removal. So there's minimal delay in burial, and most patients are going to need an autopsy anyway. The body is always dealt with respectfully throughout this process. And then other issues people have raised is that the human body there's a sanctity to the body that you don't want to harm or injure the body further. But to me, this always hasn't made sense because why would somebody agree to give a living donor a kidney, say for instance? They're happy to do that for a family member, and you're cutting on a living body, and they're at risk of having complications of surgery and even dying from that procedure. But yet, a dead body, you can't do that to. It doesn't. How can the dead body be more holy or sanctified than a living body? And then, the final point to note in South Africa, like I said, is that so many patients are turned down for dialysis every year, and every time that and other patients are dying waiting for other organs. So every time somebody says yes to donate the organs, and even if it's just the kidneys, but if you agree to donate all the organs, that's 2 kidneys, heart, lungs, liver. You can save at least 5 patients' lives just by saying yes. And I mean, with all this happening, can people actually still be saying no? It always, whenever the coordinators come up to me and say, "Oh, you had a very good potential donor, but the family said no." It reminds me of this verse from Surah Al-An'am, which is chapter 6, verse 141, and where Allah says, "And do not waste. Verily, He does not love the wasteful." And it might be an extreme way to look at waste, but to me, in the end, I mean, there's 5 people that could have been saved if somebody had just said yes, but they said no. So just to conclude, I don't know if I've gone a bit too fast, but just to say that organ donation is allowed in Islam. That is the majority view. I've given you all the reasons why the Islamic arguments and just the humanitarian reasons why it should happen. And it saves many lives, and I'm sure many of you know people that maybe would have been alive today if they'd got an organ transplant. So just to say, I don't wish that anybody was ever in that position where your family member is lying there on the ventilator and somebody comes to ask you, would you agree to donate the organs? But if you are ever in that very sad position, just consider saying yes, because it will make such a big difference to everybody involved in that system and like to say, to many patients. Because, with all this happening, can we really afford to say no and just turn a blind eye and just, forget about everybody else in your time of pain? Because I think that's a very un-Islamic way of doing things. Okay, So just once again, thank you to the Mosque Committee for allowing me to talk on this, very emotive and controversial topic. I'm sorry if I've offended anybody or made any errors. If anybody wants, I've got information on how to, if you're interested in more reading on the topic, and also you can sign up as an organ donor with the Organ Donor Foundation. They've got a very good website as well. Shukran again. Assalamu alaikum.